Children for 6 months fed the homeless dog. And here's how he thanked them. A faint glow touched the rooftops of a quiet Philadelphia neighborhood as dawn began its slow arrival. A gentle breeze passed through the empty streets, carrying the scent of the previous night's rain. In the heart of this hush, an unlikely friendship was forming. Day after day, a small group of children, still rubbing sleep from their eyes, ventured onto the sidewalk behind their neighborhood bakery, the aroma of fresh bread drifting in the air. Waiting for them was a single, frail dog trembling with uncertainty, yet never turning away from their outstretched hands. This was the beginning of a bond that would transform everyone who touched it. What follows is a story of resilience, compassion, and the quietly powerful ways that trust blooms between creatures, especially when nurtured by the pure hearts of children. Over the course of 6 months, this group of friends and the lonely stray they named Milo discovered that true connections can transcend the barriers of homelessness, hunger, and heartbreak. Their experience rippled throughout their families and into the wider community, demonstrating how small acts of kindness can foster incredible transformations. What began as a simple morning ritual, dropping scraps of bread, leftover sandwiches, or bits of cheese, grew into an unbreakable bond. For the children, those humble offerings were the start of something bigger than they could ever have imagined. For the dog, each morsel represented warmth, a delicate thread in a tapestry of newfound hope. What happened when he finally found his own way of saying thank you would astonish everyone around him. In the eastern suburbs of Philadelphia, there was a street called Redwood Lane, lined with row houses so close together that you could almost touch the neighbor's walls from your own doorstep. On one end stood an old sign reading Purina Dog Chow Feed with love over what used to be a small pet store before it shut down a decade ago. The place had been locked up and boarded ever since, its paint peeling away under the assault of countless seasons. Redwood Lane wasn't the wealthiest area, nor the poorest, just an unassuming stretch of middle-class homes where people worked honest jobs. Kids biked after school, and neighbors exchanged friendly nods over chain-link fences. The morning hush was a comforting, everyday lull before cars revved up, shops opened, and footsteps hurried to catch buses or subways. It was in this lull that 5 children began their secret mission to tend to a stray dog. The group comprised 5 unlikely friends, bonded by a simple desire to make a difference. There was Jonas, an unassuming 12-year-old with tousled brown hair and an endless curiosity. Next was Carmen, a 10-year-old with big dreams of becoming a veterinarian. She loved animals more than anything. Emmanuel, or Manny for short, was the tallest of the bunch at 13, often sporting a Philadelphia Eagles cap. Grace, 11, carried a small sketchbook wherever she went, her bright green eyes always noticing details others missed. And Charlotte, the shyest of all at 11, moved to Redwood Lane only 6 months ago. Together, they formed a pocket of innocence in an often unforgiving world. Each came from different family situations. Jonas's parents were teachers struggling with budget cuts. Carmen was being raised by her grandmother. Manny's single mom juggled night shifts at the nearby hospital. Grace lived with 2 artistic parents who encouraged her sketches. And Charlotte had just lost her father in an accident, forcing her mother to relocate. Some might call them misfits. They called themselves the Sunrise Squad because they always seemed to gather at dawn, their shared curiosity urging them to explore a world just waking up. The dog first appeared one drizzly morning when Jonas took out the trash. The scrawny silhouette, drenched in the downpour, caught his eye beneath a flickering street lamp in the alley behind Redwood Lane. Its ribs poked through dull brown fur. Its eyes gleamed with a mixture of fear and pleading. Jonas froze, slowly extending a cautious hand. The dog skittered back, splashing in muddy puddles, but he didn't flee entirely. Something in Jonas's gentle approach, or perhaps his unwavering gaze, disarmed the dog's flight instinct just enough. Jonas scrambled back inside, rummaging for leftover meatballs from the previous night's dinner. He unwrapped them and laid them gently on a paper napkin outside. That was the first act of kindness. The dog, too hungry to resist, ventured forward and devoured every morsel, then vanished into the shadows before Jonas could react. The next day, Jonas told Carmen, Manny, Grace, and Charlotte about the encounter. Curiosity flickered in their eyes. One by one, they agreed to sneak out the following morning to see if the dog would return. A sense of excitement and mission galvanized them. None predicted how deep their commitment would become. It took a full week of gentle coaxing, bits of leftover dinner, and quiet waiting at dawn for the dog to step closer. Carmen insisted on naming him Milo, after a dog in a children's book she had loved. The name stuck. Soon, it wasn't just Jonas leaving scraps outside, but Manny arriving with pieces of roasted chicken, or Grace sharing half her sandwich from the night before. Carmen would even slip the dog a few dog treats she'd begged her grandmother to buy, claiming it was for a school project. Charlotte, who found it hardest to speak around new people, would watch from a small distance, her bright eyes never leaving Milo. In the early days, Milo remained skittish. A single loud sound, like a trash truck clattering through the alley, would send him bolting away. But each morning, after some minutes of watchful stillness, he'd return, tail wagging with a timid, uncertain grace. The children talked to him in hushed whispers, trying not to alarm him, calling his name in gentle tones. With every breakfast offering, they felt Milo's trust inch forward, a slow tide rising on the shore of his battered spirit. As the weeks melted into each other, the kids noticed signs that Milo hadn't always been a street dog. He responded, albeit nervously, to a few commands, like sit or stay. A worn collar, half torn, clung loosely to his neck, suggesting he'd once had a home. Manny, whose father had deserted the family years prior, was especially drawn to Milo's aura of abandonment. It was as if dog and boy saw in each other a wounded place made of lonely corners. One chilly afternoon, Manny confided in Jonas and Carmen about a rumor he'd heard an elderly neighbor claim. Milo had been owned by a truck driver who came through Redwood Lane a year ago. The driver rented a room nearby but abruptly skipped town, leaving the dog behind. No one could confirm the rumor's truth, but the sorrow in Milo's eyes seemed to align with such a sad tale. The children resolved to become Milo's new family, at least until they could find someone to adopt him or persuade a local shelter to take him in. The only problem was that official adoptions required adult support, and adult involvement could mean restrictions, or worse, a scolding for feeding a stray that might be dangerous. So they kept their secret mission going, day by day, behind their parents' backs. Milo gradually learned to expect the Sunrise Squad at specific times. Before the streetlights turned off, the children would gather in the alley, each clutching a small offering, a chunk of meat, a piece of cheese, half a bagel. They saved their allowances to buy a few cans of dog food from a nearby convenience store. Manny once found a partially used bag of Purina dog chow in his building storage area, probably left behind by a previous tenant, and made sure to lug it all the way to Redwood Lane. Together, the children created a makeshift feeding station behind the old boarded pet store, carefully positioning the food where the morning sun would keep it from spoiling too quickly. During these meetings, their conversations flowed. Charlotte, once too shy to speak, grew bolder, recounting stories from her old home. Grace sketched Milo constantly, her drawings capturing the subtle shift in his posture as he grew healthier and more confident. Carmen practiced whispering commands in Spanish, which Milo sometimes seemed to understand. Jonas kept track of Milo's weight gain, noticing that his ribs were no longer so prominent. Of course, Not everyone in the neighborhood appreciated the presence of a stray dog. A stern mail carrier complained about the dog, occasionally scaring her while she delivered letters. A couple who lived 2 streets down insisted that stray animals were a menace, attributing every toppled trash bin to poor Milo. One Saturday, an annoyed neighbor threatened to call animal control if the mutt kept hanging around. Fear gripped the children. They'd heard stories of what happened to stray animals when pounds got overcrowded. Carmen's grandmother had worked at a shelter once and told her in hushed tones about dogs euthanized when they weren't adopted soon enough. The kids made a pact. They would do everything possible to keep Milo safe, even if it meant finding him a permanent home in secret. During the 3rd month, Milo began to wag his tail more confidently as he approached the children, even allowing gentle pats on his back. The first time Manny scratched behind his ears, Milo leaned into it with such gratitude that Manny's eyes misted. Jonas, the unofficial leader of their group, started discussing the possibility of taking Milo to a vet for a checkup. But the plan was tricky, none of them could drive, and revealing Milo to the adults was still too risky. Carmen, determined to protect the dog at all costs, begged her grandmother for help under the guise of a local animal shelter drive. But her grandmother was wary. She had her own financial struggles and didn't feel confident adding another responsibility to their tight budget. So for the time being, the children decided to keep feeding Milo and do what they could to nurse him back to full strength. Summer arrived, sprinkling long, warm days upon Redwood Lane. With school out of session, the children had more freedom to check on Milo during the afternoons and evenings. They brought water in plastic bowls, used a bit of leftover bubble bath to wash the grime off his coat, and attempted to brush him with an old hairbrush Manny found in his building's basement. The first brushing session ended with dog fur flying everywhere, but Milo rolled on his back in sheer canine bliss. They discovered that Milo loved playing with a ragged tennis ball Manny salvaged from a lost and found box at the playground. Watching him chase the ball and return it clumsily was a delight. Grace captured these joyful moments in her sketches, pencil lines swirling into a vivid testament of how far Milo had come. The secrecy surrounding Milo became harder to maintain. One especially hot afternoon, Grace's mother drove by and spotted Grace and Jonas sitting on the curb, feeding something behind the pet store. Curious, she parked her car and approached. Luckily, Milo caught the movement and darted behind a large dumpster, vanishing from sight. Grace hastily explained they were just hanging out. Suspicious, but in a rush to reach a pottery class, her mother shrugged and went on her way. Still, the children's parents were beginning to notice their unusual morning habits, getting up too early, rummaging through leftovers, or returning home with dog hair on their clothes. Tensions rose. Charlotte's mom demanded to know why she always came home with dirty jeans and muddy sneakers. Jonas's father, a math teacher, jokingly asked if Jonas had discovered a new project involving wildlife observation. Carmen's grandmother insisted that if Carmen was doing something that might get her in trouble, she'd better come clean. To circumvent suspicion, they started rotating tasks. 2 kids went out in the morning, while the others spread out the rest of the day's feedings. Manny offered to do some late-night checks. Charlotte, for her part, often kept watch from her 2nd-floor window, which had a partial view of the alley. Still, the group sensed that time was running out. Sooner or later, the secret would slip. Charlotte felt guilty about the constant subterfuge. One evening, she mustered the courage to propose an idea. Maybe they should contact a reputable shelter like the Pennsylvania SPCA. She'd read that the organization sometimes fosters dogs, giving them a chance for adoption without immediate risk. But Manny and Jonas resisted. Their experiences taught them that not all shelters had happy endings for older dogs or strays with potential behavioral issues. Milo, they feared, might not pass the temperament tests easily, especially when fear had lodged in his bones for so long. Carmen weighed the idea carefully, remembering her grandmother's stories of overworked shelter volunteers trying to cope with too many animals. Grace nodded in somber agreement. For now, they agreed that Milo's best chance was with them, at least until they figured out a better plan. Despite the dilemma, Milo's improvements were hard to miss. His coat had taken on a healthier sheen, and he walked with more energy. Even the mail carrier, who had once complained, seemed less worried after seeing Milo's newfound friendliness. At times, he even waddled up to greet neighbors, though many still shooed him away or moved briskly by. In the children's eyes, Milo was now part of their family. They exchanged stories about him as if he were a younger sibling. Carmen wrote short journal entries about every new behavior Milo learned. Manny confided in Milo about missing his father, and Charlotte found herself whispering secrets about how much she missed her old life before her father passed. Whenever she did, Milo nuzzled her leg softly, as if offering silent comfort. If one can imagine the invisible threads that connect a group of people, Milo's presence wove them tighter. Not everyone saw Milo's transformation as a blessing. A local cat lover named Mr. Schwartz claimed Milo was chasing the feral cats he fed. Disgruntled, he posted flyers warning neighbors to watch out for a rogue dog. Manny, outraged at the accusation, confronted Mr. Schwartz, who brushed him off. The older man insisted he had every right to protect his feline friends and threatened again to call animal control. The tension in Redwood Lane escalated. On a few nights, the children found small lumps of cat food laced with something suspicious near Milo's usual feeding spot. Alarmed, they disposed of the suspicious food, suspecting it might have been left intentionally to sicken Milo. They realized with horror that Milo's life was in constant jeopardy from people who saw him as a pest or a threat. One evening, after discovering yet another suspicious substance scattered behind the dumpster, Jonas decided something had to be done. The children convened in Charlotte's tiny backyard. Summer's heat still clung to the air, but a new chill coursed through their hearts. They agreed Milo needed a safe place to sleep at night, out of reach from those who might harm him. But where? None of their parents knew about Milo, and sneaking a dog into a house full-time was risky. Manny confessed that his mom sometimes came home at odd hours from her night shift. Carmen's grandmother was allergic to pet dander. Jonas's parents would never agree to something so clandestine. Grace's parents traveled frequently for art exhibitions. Charlotte's mother was still grappling with heartbreak and finances after her husband's passing. In the end, they decided to create a hidden shelter behind the old pet store. Using discarded crates, a couple of sheets of plywood, and tarps, they built a makeshift doghouse. Manny even scrounged up an old comforter someone had thrown away after washing it thoroughly in a nearby laundromat. They set it all up at dusk, hoping no one would notice in the darkness. When Milo first encountered his new abode, he circled it warily, sniffing the tarp, the wood, and the comforter. The children stood by, hearts pounding. Would he accept it? Slowly, Milo stepped inside, paw by paw, and lay down. He watched the children with eyes that glowed with what seemed like gratitude. A quiet hush fell over them. None of them spoke, but a collective wave of relief and joy passed through their circle. For the first time, they knew Milo had a place to call his own, however humble. It was a stopgap measure, but an important one. With a safe place to sleep, Milo's health and happiness soared over the next few weeks. He greeted the children more exuberantly each day, occasionally dancing on his hind legs when they brought food. Every time Charlotte approached, he rolled onto his back, tail thumping, demanding belly rubs. The doghouse became a small sanctuary for them all, an emblem of hope in a dusty alley. Their relief was short-lived. One Sunday morning, while Manny checked in on Milo, he discovered a bright yellow sticker plastered on the boarded windows of the old pet store. notice of demolition. Property scheduled to be demolished in 30 days. Manny froze. The city planned to tear down the building, an action that would also destroy Milo's doghouse. Worse, the demolition crew and inspectors would inevitably find Milo and potentially call animal control. Panic swept through the Sunrise Squad. They had exactly 1 month to figure out a more permanent solution for Milo. The children wrestled with frantic thoughts. Do they keep him hidden elsewhere? Attempt a clandestine rehoming? Confront their parents? For the first time, they felt the weight of real consequences pressing down on their shoulders. Jonas, who'd led the group thus far with calm resolve, found himself at a crossroads. He realized the situation had become too big for them to handle alone. But admitting that they'd been secretly feeding and sheltering a stray for 6 months could spark anger, punishment, and perhaps the ultimate heartbreak, Milo being taken away. They gathered again in Charlotte's backyard. Emotions ran high. Manny railed against the unfairness. Carmen wept in frustration. Grace bit her lip in silence, and Charlotte could only stare at the ground. After a long pause, Jonas spoke. "We have to trust the grown-ups." His words hung in the air. The next day, Jonas timidly approached his father, David, after dinner. With trembling honesty, he explained the entire saga, from the rainy day Milo first appeared to the makeshift doghouse behind the soon-to-be-demolished pet store. Jonas braced himself for anger, or at least stern lectures about responsibilities and safety. Instead, his father remained quiet, listening intently. Then, gently, he asked to see Milo. Jonas, stunned, nodded. That evening, father and son walked the short distance to Redwood Lane's end. They found Milo curled up in his shelter, half asleep but wagging his tail at the sight of Jonas. David studied the dog's calm demeanor and carefully offered his hand to sniff. Milo accepted. David's eyes, heavy with the day's fatigue, softened. "He's a good dog," he murmured. Within days, Carmen's grandmother, Manny's mom, Grace's parents, and Charlotte's mother learned the truth in hushed conversations around their respective kitchen tables. The children explained how the dog had come into their lives, how they'd cared for him, and what would happen once the demolition crew arrived. Many emotions churned: shock, concern, pride, exasperation. Manny's mom was particularly vocal, scolding him for sneaking around, yet tears glistened in her eyes as she saw how deeply he cared. Surprisingly, the parents, who had mostly struggled with their own challenges, finances, grief, overwork, realized the significance of their children's devotion. They could have punished them all and handed Milo off to the pound, but something about their kids' compassion and the dog's transformation moved them. They decided to hold a neighborhood meeting to discuss Milo's fate openly. The meeting was set for a warm Saturday afternoon in the Redwood Lane Community Center, a modest brick building with squeaky folding chairs and fluorescent lights. Word spread, and by 3 o'clock, a handful of curious neighbors showed up, along with the children and their parents. On display were Grace's sketches of Milo, showing his progression from a trembling stray to a healthier, happier dog. Carmen spoke up first, describing how they'd been feeding Milo in secret for half a year. Manny explained the threat of the demolition and Mr. Schwartz's complaints. Jonas offered a plan. Perhaps the community could rally to help find Milo a forever home or raise enough funds for medical exams and vaccinations to ensure he was safe to adopt. Some neighbors were unimpressed, muttering about liability, disease, or cost. Others were intrigued or touched by the story. To the children's surprise, a few older residents stepped forward, praising the kids for their kindness. Even the mail carrier, who'd once been afraid, recounted how Milo had become less skittish and stopped barking at her. The real breakthrough came when Miss Perez, a widow living on the far side of Redwood Lane, recounted losing her own dog, Bella, 2 years prior. Tears welled in her eyes as she admitted she'd been too heartbroken to adopt another. But seeing the children's dedication made her wonder if she could open her heart again. She tentatively offered to foster Milo. The community meeting erupted in hopeful chatter. Could Milo finally have a home? One stumbling block remained. Miss Perez lived on a tight fixed income. She couldn't afford all the initial veterinary fees, vaccinations, neutering, and potential microchipping by herself. That's when Manny's mum suggested a community fundraiser, maybe a bake sale, or an online campaign, anything to gather the needed funds to ensure Milo's well-being. Inspiration kindled. The parents and kids began brainstorming at once. Over the next week, Redwood Lane buzzed with preparations. Grace designed flyers for a bake sale and yard sale. Carmen's grandmother volunteered her famous empanadas, while Manny's mum offered to make tamales in bulk. Jonas's parents, both teachers, promised to spread the word at school. Charlotte's mother, gradually healing from her grief, decided to knit small dog sweaters to sell, with all proceeds going to Milo's care. The children, excited and relieved, worked tirelessly. They peddled flyers door to door, posted them at local businesses, and even set up a simple online fundraiser using Manny's mother's social media account. Support trickled in, then flowed. Neighbors donated items for the yard sale: old furniture, books, clothes, electronics. Carmen's grandmother's empanadas proved wildly popular. People from surrounding streets came to Redwood Lane to partake in the sense of community and generosity. On the day of the fundraiser, a modest but cheerful crowd gathered outside the community center. Tables were laden with goodies from brownies to homemade lemonade. Manny's tamales sold out in an hour. Charlotte's mother's dog sweaters, though knitted in record time, found new homes quickly, especially among dog-owning neighbors. Much to the children's delight, even Mr. Schwartz stopped by. He purchased a cat-themed coffee mug at the yard sale and, in a surprising gesture, dropped a $10 bill into the donation jar. He avoided eye contact, mumbling something about appreciating respect for all animals. But for Manny and the others, it felt like a small miracle. At the end of the day, they counted the money raised, nearly $700. Not enough to cover every expense, but certainly a significant start. Miss Perez, overcome with gratitude, hugged each child. She promised she'd do her part to keep Milo healthy and loved, no matter what the future held. With funds secured, Miss Perez and Jonas's father arranged a trip to the local veterinary clinic called Philly Pet Wellness, a real clinic in the city. The children nervously accompanied them, fear and excitement mingling in the waiting room. Milo, trembling but calm, allowed the vet to examine him, draw blood, and administer vaccines. After a thorough checkup, the vet explained that Milo was probably around 3 years old, slightly underweight, but otherwise in decent shape, considering his time on the streets. He needed a dental cleaning, a deworming treatment, and a neuter operation procedures. The vet offered at a small discount after hearing the story. Even so, the total cost exceeded their immediate funds. That's when Miss Perez shyly pulled out a small envelope of her own savings. "This is for him," she said softly, eyes shining. With that, Milo's medical care was assured. Milo's neuter operation went smoothly, though he was groggy and confused for a couple of days afterward. Perez prepared a cozy corner in her living room, complete with a soft dog bed, toys, and a small, squeaky ball. For the first time in 6 months, Milo slept indoors, unafraid of the weather or passing footsteps. The children visited often, ensuring Milo still felt their presence. They walked him around Redwood Lane, showing him the spots he once roamed. Neighbors began greeting Milo with cautious warmth, and the animosity that once loomed started to fade. The demolition date for the old pet store approached, but Milo no longer needed the doghouse. The worn tarp and crates would soon be bulldozed away, fittingly symbolic of a darker chapter closing behind him. Change rippled through the children's lives, too. Manny, inspired by how the community had banded together, started volunteering at a local soup kitchen, believing that small acts of service could help others just like it helped Milo. Carmen, fueled by her desire to help more animals, decided to spend weekends assisting at a local shelter, where she learned the ropes of feeding schedules, socializing shy dogs, and comforting anxious cats. Grace found her sketches in high demand. After neighbors glimpsed them during the fundraiser, she sold a few as prints, saving the money for her future dream of attending art school. Charlotte, once burdened by grief, realized that caring for Milo had been a powerful step in her own healing process. She felt less alone and saw how compassion for a vulnerable dog could reconnect her to the joy of life. Jonas continued to support Miss Perez and Milo, ensuring everything ran smoothly. He grew closer to his father throughout the process, as they shared the responsibilities of dog care. Their father-son relationship, once overshadowed by long work hours and academic stress, blossomed with genuine understanding and pride. All told, it had been half a year since the Sunrise Squad first laid eyes on the scrawny, rain-soaked dog in the alley. The transformation was almost miraculous. Milo now moved with a gentle confidence, tail wagging at the sight of familiar faces. The demolition of the old pet store went by unnoticed by most except for a small pang in the children's hearts as they remembered the makeshift doghouse they had built with such love. But the real question lingered: how would Milo thank them? They hadn't done all this to receive a reward, but they wondered, in their childlike innocence, if Milo understood their devotion. Deep down, they knew that every wag of his tail and each appreciative lick was its own kind of gratitude. Yet fate had a more dramatic showing of his thanks in store. One bright afternoon, Manny decided to walk Milo around the block. Miss Perez, suffering a minor cold, stayed inside, trusting Manny's calm presence. The day was warm, the sky a cerulean canvas. Milo trotted along happily, ears perked and tail high. From behind a parked car, a large black dog suddenly emerged, snarling and barking. Its owner, a teenager with earphones, seemed distracted and struggled to hold the leash. Milo tensed, stepping closer to Manny's side. The big dog lunged, pulling its leash from the teenager's hand. Manny, adrenaline surging, tried to back away, but the bigger dog charged straight at them. In a split second, Milo placed himself between Manny and the onrushing dog. His hackles rose, and he let out a low growl that belied the gentle nature they all knew. Manny stumbled backward, scraping his knee on the concrete. The aggressive dog clamped its jaws at Milo, and for a terrifying moment, their teeth bared in a flurry of snarls. Milo held his ground, refusing to let the larger dog reach Manny. Alarmed by Manny's shout, neighbors rushed out of their homes. The other dog's owner finally intervened, wrestling the leash and pulling the dog away. Panting and trembling, Milo remained in front of Manny, as if to shield him. Word spread quickly about how Milo had protected Manny, refusing to back down despite the fearsome opponent. Manny's mother hugged Milo so tightly he squirmed in protest. Even Mr. Schwartz, hearing the story, mumbled a grudging respect for the dog's bravery. Over the next few days, the children remained in awe of Milo's instinct to protect one of his own. For them, it was a clear sign, Milo knew, deeply, the love they had shown. And in that urgent, perilous moment, he had shown his gratitude in the most selfless way possible. True gratitude doesn't always come in words or wagging tails. Sometimes it arrives in moments of unwavering loyalty. Following the incident, more neighbors warmed up to Milo. The big dog's owner apologized profusely to Manny and his mother, promising to be more vigilant. Miss Perez took pride in walking Milo around the block, pausing to chat with those who wanted to say hello. The children's hearts glowed with the knowledge that they had saved Milo, and now Milo had repaid them by saving Manny from potential harm. The synergy of caring and being cared for had come full circle. With Miss Perez as his official caretaker, Milo was truly home at last. The gratitude Milo displayed extended beyond that single event. Every day he seemed more playful, sometimes bounding in circles when the children visited. Charlotte, whose quiet sadness still lingered from losing her father, found solace in how Milo greeted her with special attention, nudging her hand or licking away her tears when she felt overwhelmed. In caring for Milo, she discovered the first real laughter she'd felt in many months. Jonas's parents commended him for his leadership. They saw how he nurtured a sense of responsibility and empathy that went beyond mere chores. Carmen's grandmother finally relaxed her earlier worries and ended up preparing bowls of homemade stew for Milo, making sure Miss Perez had a stockpile of hearty meals to mix into his kibble. Manny's transformation was the most striking. He matured into a figure of quiet determination, balanced by a generous heart. Over conversations in Miss Perez's cozy living room, the children and their parents realized how Milo's journey highlighted broader truths about compassion. Helping someone in need, be it a stray animal or a neighbor struggling, could spark transformations in everyone involved. Manny's mother reflected on how, before Milo, Manny had been restless, sometimes resentful about his absentee father. Caring for Milo gave Manny a sense of purpose and renewed faith in the goodness of relationships. Carmen's grandmother saw that Carmen's deep empathy for animals was more than a childhood phase. It was the spark of a future calling. Jonas's father, David, told him that the entire ordeal revealed something about Redwood Lane. Behind its worn facades and financial struggles lay a community capable of unity and love. As summer transitioned into fall, Redwood Lane glowed with rust-colored leaves. The children, now a year older, faced new academic challenges, but they still found time to visit Milo daily. Perez officially registered him with the city, ensuring he had proper identification. The community fundraiser not only saved Milo, but also left a surplus that Miss Perez used to sponsor other stray animals at the local shelter. Carmen volunteered at that very shelter every Saturday, forging a link between Redwood Lane and the broader world of rescue efforts. A local journalist heard the story and wrote a short piece in the Philadelphia Inquirer about how a group of kids, a determined dog, and a supportive neighborhood collaborated to turn a heartbreaking stray situation into a beacon of community spirit. The article briefly mentioned Redwood Lane, Miss Perez, and even Manny's dream of becoming someone who helps not just dogs, but people in need. The children's friendship strengthened through their shared devotion to Milo. They still called themselves the Sunrise Squad, though their morning gatherings had less urgency now. Instead, they met to walk Milo around the block, share their day's adventures, or plan small charitable acts. One morning, they collected old blankets for the shelter's dogs. Another day, they organized a coat drive for underprivileged families. In those small acts, their bond glowed, reminding everyone that what they did for Milo was just the start. Resilience, connection, and personal growth had become their guiding themes, shaping their perspective of the world around them. 6 months had indeed changed everything. The kids often reminisced about the day Jonas first spotted Milo hunched in the alley, drenched by rain, too afraid to approach. Back then, they never would have imagined that their covert mission to feed a homeless dog would evolve into a life-changing saga for themselves and their neighbors. Charlotte, especially, recalled how she'd barely spoken a word when she first joined Redwood Lane. Now, she felt strong enough to speak in front of a classroom about the importance of compassion toward animals. Milo's presence and unwavering acceptance of her had played a crucial role in coaxing her out of her shell of grief. In subtle ways, Milo's story resonated beyond Redwood Lane. People who heard about him considered volunteering at shelters or adopting pets rather than buying from breeders. A local shop owner began leaving out a small bowl of water for stray animals after reading the story in the paper. Even Mr. Schwartz, ironically, noticed fewer feral cats around, as many were being humanely trapped and rehabilitated by new volunteers inspired by the dog's rescue. Redwood Lane, once a typical urban street, became an example of how a community could rally around a single life. One crisp Saturday morning, nearly a year from the day Milo appeared, Miss Perez hosted a small gathering in her backyard. A bright new dog collar, shining with a silver tag, was presented to Milo. Engraved on the tag was Milo, loved by Redwood Lane. The children, their parents, and a few neighbors attended. They brought treats, and Manny's mom cooked grilled chicken. Milo pranced around, wagging his tail, greeting everyone as though he knew he was the guest of honor. In that backyard, a content hush fell. This was Milo's final profound thank you, the living testament of a dog that once shied away from any human contact, now weaving through the legs of neighbors, accepting their pats and love without fear. His gratitude was a shining, wordless bond that said, "You saved me, and I will forever be yours." For Jonas, this experience illuminated the power of empathy in uniting people with a common goal. Carmen realized that her path to becoming a veterinarian was lit by her unwavering love for animals, and she would continue to volunteer at the shelter. Manny found a sense of belonging he'd craved since his father left. Grace's artistic talents flourished, telling visual stories of love and resilience. Charlotte emerged from her grief a braver girl, discovering that healing could come in the most unexpected ways. Each child carried these lessons forward. Acts of kindness, no matter how small, matter greatly. If you show someone or some creature that you care, they might just return the favor in ways you never expected. As the seasons shifted once again, the memory of Milo's transformation settled into the living tapestry of Redwood Lane. Some front porches now displayed small dog sculptures or wind chimes shaped like dog bones, a nod to the year. Redwood Lane saved a life and, in turn, found renewed purpose. The once derelict pet store lot turned into a pocket park with a few benches and a mural Grace helped paint. The mural depicted Milo's silhouette, symbolizing hope and the promise of second chances. Even travelers passing by that stretch of Philadelphia might notice the mural and wonder about the story behind it. The older residents, if asked, would recount the tale of how 5 children fed a homeless dog for 6 months and how he repaid them in loyalty, bravery, and boundless affection. This legacy didn't just stop with Milo. Inspired by the success of the fundraiser, Redwood Lane's community center began hosting monthly events to help animals and families in need. They organized pet food drives, free spay-neuter clinics, and even adopt-a-plant days for those looking to green their surroundings. A spirit of volunteerism took root, with neighbors checking in on one another more often, assisting the elderly, and ensuring that Redwood Lane never again turned a blind eye to any creature in distress. For the children who started it all, it felt like witnessing ripples on a pond. One act of kindness had spread outward, touching people in ways they couldn't have anticipated. And in each new wave of generosity, Milo's presence loomed large, a silent but constant reminder that compassion begets compassion. Time never stands still. Winter approached once more, bringing cold winds that whistled through the row houses. Miss Perez now had a stash of dog sweaters. Charlotte's mother kept knitting them, and Milo wore them proudly. On especially chilly days, he'd curl up in the living room, Miss Perez reading beside him. The children, burdened by new school projects, found less frequent time to drop by. Still, Milo greeted them with the same fervent tail wagging whenever they managed to visit. They'd watch old videos on Jonas's phone, showing Milo's first shaky steps in the alley. Comparing that uncertain dog to the exuberant companion, Milo had become always made them smile. Hardly a day went by where Manny didn't mention how Milo once stood between him and the snarling dog, a fearless sentinel. They felt a gentle pang, knowing that the unstoppable march of time might one day lead them away from Redwood Lane off to college, careers, and new chapters. But Milo's story would forever be their anchor. One late afternoon, Jonas stopped by Miss Perez's home alone. He found Milo dozing on a warm rug, head resting on Miss Perez's slipper. Quietly, Jonas knelt down, patting Milo's head. The dog stirred, blinking sleep away, and gently licked Jonas's hand. In that moment, Jonas felt overwhelmed by everything that had happened: the secrecy, the near misses, the fundraising, the acceptance, and Milo's unwavering loyalty. Tears prickled at the corners of his eyes, but he smiled through them, murmuring, "You've done so much for us, buddy." No words could properly encapsulate the swirl of gratitude Jonas felt. But Milo, in his dog way, understood. He nudged Jonas's arm, gazing at him with those trusting brown eyes that once held so much fear. Life's road is paved with challenges and triumphs. For Redwood Lane, Milo represented the best of what a community could achieve when hearts unite. The children, forging ahead in their studies, carried themselves with the quiet assurance that they had made a difference. They learned that real growth wasn't measured by grades or trophies, but by the size of their compassion and the resilience they discovered within themselves. Their parents, once preoccupied with personal burdens, realized that they, too, had grown. They discovered new depths in their children, saw them not just as kids, but as caring individuals capable of inspiring change. Over shared meals and evening strolls, families reflected on the improbable sequence of events that led a ragged stray dog to become Redwood Lane's beloved mascot. Though this story spanned only 6 months, its emotional weight transcended that time. Milo's fear, symbolic of all fears lurking in the corners of life, had been gently replaced with love and security. In that, each child found a parable for their own struggles. Manny's old resentment toward his father, Carmen's quiet worry about her future, Grace's cautious approach to showcasing her art, Charlotte's grief, and Jonas's fear of disappointing his parents, each found a measure of healing through caring for Milo. Indeed, they had walked together from fear into faith in each other, in the community, in the small miracles that kindness can spark. By the time spring returned, Redwood Lane was awash in flowers. Miss Perez's yard boasted newly planted daisies and tulips, while Manny's mother nurtured a small garden of tomatoes and peppers. The children's old doghouse behind the pet store was long gone, replaced by a small park bench dedicated to all creatures who need a friend, courtesy of the Redwood Lane Neighborhood Association. A new rumor circulated that Redwood Lane might be featured in another Philadelphia newspaper story about community-driven transformations. Even if it never happened, the residents felt no less proud. Milo's presence was reminder enough of how far they'd come. When a new family moved onto Redwood Lane, a couple with a timid son named Alex, they worried he wouldn't fit in or make friends. But the children introduced Alex to Milo, explaining that if a dog who once cowered at every noise could learn to trust, perhaps Alex could too. Over time, Alex found confidence in the simple act of walking Milo around the block. Gradually, Redwood Lane's spirit of acceptance enveloped him, mirroring how they had once welcomed a homeless dog. On the anniversary of Milo's rescue, Miss Perez officially changed his microchip information to read Milo Perez. It was a small legal step, but symbolically immense. Milo had a surname, a permanent belonging. In her living room, she hung a framed collage of Grace's sketches documenting Milo's journey. Below it, Manny's mother wrote in careful penmanship, "A home is built on love, not walls." With each passing day, Redwood Lane's children grew older, stepping into new phases of life. But they carried with them the unshakable knowledge that unity, kindness, and resilience could triumph over indifference and despair. Milo's story became their compass, reminding them that every life, no matter how seemingly insignificant or abandoned, matters deeply. Milo aged gracefully, forever playful yet content to lounge at Miss Perez's feet. When Manny's mother occasionally teased him about his guard dog moment, Milo would tilt his head as though recalling the day he stood firm to protect Manny. The dog's eyes seemed to say he'd do it all again if needed. Time is relentless, but it also reveals the lasting truths behind actions. Those 6 months that the children spent secretly feeding a frail stray dog were filled with more than daily scraps of food. They were filled with an invisible yet powerful ingredient: love. With each chunk of bread or piece of leftover meatball, they fed Milo not just nourishment for his body, but warmth for his soul. In the end, the gratitude he showed through companionship, loyalty, and that decisive moment of protection was the culmination of everything they had offered him. No words, no plaques, no medals, just a steadfast beating heart that said, "You saved me. Now I save you." Those children, and indeed the entire neighborhood, grew in ways they never would have otherwise. And in that growth, they discovered the real miracle. Compassion is the purest force we can offer one another, and it can sprout unexpectedly, like wildflowers in a vacant lot. As you turn off this video and step back into your day, remember that small acts of kindness can spark monumental change. The children on Redwood Lane didn't set out to transform a neighborhood or rescue a dog. They simply responded to suffering with empathy. Yet, that simple choice blossomed into a powerful community effort, giving Milo not only a home, but a family, and giving the children confidence, hope, and a vision of what's possible when hearts unite. If this story touched you, please show your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Spread the message that every small gesture of compassion, every act of feeding a hungry soul, whether human or animal, can become a ripple of light in someone's darkest moment. Together, we can create a world where no cry for help goes unanswered, and where simple kindness weaves communities closer than ever before.